Been in that rat race as a manager for sort of 12, 13 years. I was sacked twice in one season. That's not a good look, and I think sometimes football gives you a rest as much as you want a little bit of a rest from football. The media scrutiny is the bit that probably is the most difficult to manage. One of my weaknesses is my reaction to injustice. The anxiety comes for a manager where the expectation is high, the reality is a bit lower, and then there's a grey area in there. And I remember talking to Jose about that. I said to him, I know why you're frustrated, because you finished second last year for Man United and you got every drop out of that team. And he said, thank you, because you're right. I've got everything out of that team to get it to finish second and win the cup, and I'm getting no credit for it.
Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Business of Sport.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Congratulations on the great work you've done so far, and hopefully I will bear fruit enough to have a few people watch this.
You definitely will. It's a brilliant time to have the conversation, because it's really the first time by the looks of things that you've actually had any time out from football, having been in it pretty much your whole life. So I was keen to just start off with the year out that you've just had, and I guess why now was the right time to do that for you and what you've been up to.
Yeah, you're right. I've been in that rat race as a manager for sort of 12, 13 years, and there's no doubt it takes its toll. It's fantastic and I love it to bits, and I'm already itching to get back in. But I think I needed the 6 months out. Effectively, I was sacked twice in one season, and that's not a good look. And I think sometimes football gives you a rest as much as you want a little bit of a rest from football. But what you do in that time is, learn, you reflect, you review. And I've tried to use it, importantly, I think, to try and develop all areas of my management style, and, to be able to look back at the successes, the failures, and, could you tweak, could you change, could you add, and can I come back a better person, but also a better football manager and more well-rounded.
What have you kind of taken on? What have you looked at doing away from the game that has maybe given you some of that time to reflect and on that perspective and learn new things, I guess, as well?
Yeah, a lot actually. I think the first thing was obviously my daughter. I was away for 4 years pretty much during my time at Sunderland, Hibs and Fleetwood. And, so for her to go through GCSEs and stuff like that, it's quite a stressful time for a teenager. And I think it's important sometimes to be that dad, especially when you've been away that long. So I enjoyed that, and helped her get through her business and her maths and a few subjects that she was struggling with a little bit. And I think just that time spent with her was really, really important. But from a football front, I've done a lot, if I'm honest. I went into Fulham. They invited me in to speak to the academy guys, and I spoke to them about their first loan and what that looks like. Had a bit of fun, really. Looked at their Instagrams and decided which ones I'd take, which ones I wouldn't take based on their Instagram.
What would make you take someone from their Instagram?
Just somebody that's basically a footballer first, in terms of they love playing football more than enjoying the trappings of being a footballer, if that makes sense. I think I've tried to give a lot back. I put something out on LinkedIn which was a little bit naive, to say I'd like to help 2 or 3 young coaches in this time. And I got 1,000 applicants for this. People were honestly, it was amazing, really. And like I say, I was naive, but it was really nice as well, to be able to have all these coaches, not just young coaches, technical directors, wanting to understand what I was about, and the differences at different clubs. And in the end, I ended up doing a couple of webinars because there was too many people that had effectively applied for this, and that was nice, because that was giving a bit back. And I think a lot of people took a lot from the documents that I showed. I was really open, really honest, and sort of opened up what it looks like internally within a football club. I then went out to Nigeria because Premier League club had asked me to go out and do some selecting out there. There was a tournament that they'd put on, and I'd done some coaching. But that was a really interesting experience, really interesting, because I probably didn't understand the journey that African players had gone through. Maybe that I'd coached, say, Famara Jeju as an example. and now I do, and to play football, to come through the sort of level of poverty and sometimes corruption in countries like that. It's fascinating to see, and they've had to work really hard, and they've had to sacrifice a lot, and their family sacrifice a lot. So there was some amazing talent out there, really, really good talent, and they're playing football all hours of every day. And
so what are you doing? Are you helping them establish better connections with teams in the UK?
There's a couple of things really. The first thing was just pure selection. It was academy. There was 24 academy teams that were brought together for a tournament, of which there was prize money funded by a Premier League club. And I went out there to watch the quarterfinals, semi-finals and finals, and then select 22 players from that group, and then coach those 22 players, and then obviously bring back names. So part of the process for me and my expertise, I suppose, was to go out there and try and build trust. So for example, what age are they? And I know that sounds a strange question, but these guys haven't got documentation, they haven't got passports. I remember selling a player to a Premier League club when I was at Oldham, and we'd done the bone scan, and he was 4 years older, I think, than actually his passport said. So it's how come those younger academy players from Nigeria build the trust? How do we understand their age? How do we polish, I suppose, their physical attributes and their technical skill into the tactical that would be required back in England? So that was a really interesting 4 or 5 days, and I spent, the coaching was fantastic. They were so grateful, the players, they were so talented, and I was grateful to be able to coach them as well.
It's come up a lot recently, running now, like proper projects to try and develop not just Nigeria, but obviously Ghana and Senegal. And it just seems to be an area where they're starting to get a little bit more of that.
And I think that takes big investment as well to be able to do that initially, because there's so many factors. You've got to look after the lads properly, you've got to educate them, you're pulling them away from their parents, you're getting through the system in terms of making sure they have got passports, they have got birth certificates and stuff like that. And, without question, there's unbelievable talent in those areas of the world, and obviously we've seen that historically over the years. But part of my job within that mini job was to try and create a bit of a syllabus, if you like, for the tactical polishing school. And what does that look like? I think it's becoming more open now. With the internet, you've got a lot of good stuff on Twitter, on Instagram, where these guys, the coaches out there, a lot of the coaches are volunteers. So, they haven't got pro licenses or A licenses, stuff like that. They're just passionate people that love football and want to give these young lads opportunities. And, as much as I could help in the 3 or 4 days that I was out there, a lot of it was to be able to hand over what I've got and how to coach, obviously tactically.
But you also... I said you did some work you've been doing some work at City as well.
Yes, that was fantastic. I was invited to come up and coach the 35 loan players that they had. So some really high quality players in there, likes of James McAtee, Delap was in there, Callum Doyle that I'd already worked with at Sunderland, Rico Lewis was in that group, Calvin Phillips. But it wasn't just Manchester City players, it was players from within the CFG group as well. So the top players from Troyes, Japanese players, there was some really fantastic talent in the group. And for me, obviously, it was brilliant because you're back on the grass. It's like football utopia, that training ground. I lived there for a month. I was coaching on the pitch next to Pep, which was nice as well.
Giving him some tips?
I'm not sure about that. Although he did come and watch a couple of the sessions, which was quite nice. But it's learning a new way. I've been lucky. This City group have let me in over a number of years now, pretty much from when I was at Oldham, because of the geographical location. There was talk of a partnership between clubs, so I've always had that relationship since then. And it's just a brilliant organisation. Good people, talent everywhere, whether that's in the sports science department or at first team level, and they just do things really well. I think we had 23 staff that was working with myself and Steve Agnew on those players. So, what club looks after their loan players or sale players as well as that over that period of time? So I really, really enjoyed that, and obviously was gutted when that ended, but it was only ever a short-term gig.
Are you surprised? I mean, I guess you're not surprised then to see players like a Liam Delap playing so well in the Premier League already.
I'm not surprised at all. No, really good lad, absolute powerhouse. I suppose my question mark on him was, I thought he just blazed everything as a finisher. Could he have a little bit more guile in his finishing? And we sat and I went through a presentation about upgrading shots, to make sure he's not just hitting pot shots from areas that he's got no chance of scoring. So, listen, whether that had an effect, you'll have to ask him. But high quality player, and high quality players tend to take in information and try and adapt and enhance their game. And I think he's been fantastic for Ipswich this year. And I think he'll go on to be a really top player.
He's physical as well.
Powerful lad, really strong.
I was at the Fulham game at the weekend.
Yeah, and he likes to bash people about as well, doesn't he?
Third second, kick off. Yeah. Charges straight into the midfielder. You're like, okay, that's welcome to the game.
Exactly.
But it's great. You don't really see it as much.
There's a bit of a dying art, that isn't it, for a player to be able to use his physicality. But I think he'll keep learning. He'll keep growing, and I think there's already interest in him from bigger clubs just for that one half of the season.
I think it's worth saying, just emphasising for everyone listening at this point, you were a manager. Well, you played over 400 games. You then were a manager at 31, which I think was the youngest in the EFL at the time, managing in the same league as your dad. You have now managed over 500 games and you're still only 43. Is that right? Have I got my numbers right?
I might look a bit older, I think, after all that. But my career, it's strange because you don't look back, really. When you're in the mix, in the muck and nettles of being a manager, you never get to look back. And just recently I'd done a podcast for the Oval Town where I played for a couple of 100 games. So I thought, I better watch some games back on YouTube. And it's amazing when you look back, some of the memories that you've had and then lost, and some of the people that you meet and the experiences you've had, the goals you've scored. That's been nice to be able to reflect a little bit and actually say, you know what, I've done all right, given the fact that I'm 5'5" and genetically not a Premier League player.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter, does it? We had Paul McVeigh, who's another one of Lloyd's guys. Yeah. He was brilliant. He's fascinating. He was exactly the same. I was short, but hey, didn't matter.
Exactly. Pocket dynamo.
Yeah. Let's actually go to them when you have been playing and managing. I think the most interesting part I always find, and I'm interested in your side because you were young, is the transition that you made then from being a professional on the pitch in a dressing room as part of a team to then at 31 taking charge of a dressing room. How did that come about for you?
It's quite interesting because I made a decision quite early that I wanted to be a manager, and I played for my dad. When your dad's in football, as players and managers will tell you, likes of Jamie Redknapp, Harry Redknapp, you tend to be sort of almost put under the same umbrella as your dad. And I really wanted to make sure that I built my own contacts. And likes of Kenny Dalglish as an example. We had a mutual friend, met Kenny for coffee maybe 6 or 7 times. But I had a plan in place in my mind that I wanted to be a manager by the time I was 35. So I wanted to have all my coaching badges up to that point. But more importantly, I wanted to have like a corner, as I'd call it, people that are really influential in football, but good people that I connected with, and the ones that would look after you in terms of advice and stuff like that. And it was interesting, the Oldham gig came up. They're in the relegation zone. I was a rookie, and an agent that I had been speaking to had said, look, I'm going to put you in front of Simon Corney, who was the Oldham owner at the time. And I said, great. So I had 2 or 3 weeks to basically know that I had a form of an interview. So I went to the games. I had a couple of players, Chris Iwaluma as an example, that was in the dressing room that I knew well, really good lad. And I ended up getting in front of Simon Corney, but little did I know that Kenny Dalglish had rang and said, listen, like this guy's the real deal. And I could see Simon Corney uncomfortable with it. How could he put a rookie with his A licence into a relegation battle at a historic club like Oldham? And anyway, I presented, and then again he asked me would I be an assistant manager, and I'd been told by Steve Lansdowne, who's a Bristol City owner, that he's going to say to you, will you be assistant manager? And you've got to say no. And I was like, I probably would take assistant manager if I'm honest. But I said, no, there's no way, because I'm going to be a manager on the advice of Steve Lansdowne. It was Eddie Howe's Bournemouth were playing Oldham that night, and he invited me to the game. I was sat in the manager's office with Eddie Howe, and the owner had come through. Jose Baxter had tried to dink the keeper, and they'd gone down the other end and scored, Bournemouth, and 1-2-1. So Simon Corney, the owner, had gone in, volleyed the skip and broke his toe. So he came in extreme agony. Me and Eddie Howe sat in the manager's office in Oldham, tiny little office it is. Simon Corney comes hobbling in and says, right, you got the job, you start tomorrow. And that was how it worked. And between Brian Marwood at CFG, Kenny Dalglish phoning and giving me a recommendation, and Steve Lansdowne giving me that advice, that was how I ended up starting my journey.
But how do you build those relationships with those people?
I always say, like, you know, listen, it sounds disingenuous, it's not. It's, you know, I always ask for advice, never a favour. You know, people like that, you ask for tickets or signatures or stuff, you know, they're too big. Like, but what they can do is get behind you if there's a connection, if it's a genuine connection, if they believe in you. So I think there's, you know, I'm talking to young coaches now out there that are trying to forge a career in the game. I think you need like some high profile people sort of backing you and supporting you, and you can only do that obviously over a number of years, but you know, they will give out great advice. Kenny Dalglish, as an example, unbelievable advice giver. I could have been fretting about something for 5-6 weeks, you know, and I'm 30 seconds into explaining it to him, and he solved it, and he's given me the answer. You know, I'd rarely use that, but if I needed it, I'd call him and he'd help. And
I was just interested on that because, you know, I'd imagine he has a lot of people asking for his time and his advice.
Yeah.
You've obviously, do you think it is that approach, where you were approaching him in a different way? You weren't asking for things, you were looking for his advice, you were looking for his kind of stewardship, if you want. Was that different to what he would have been getting from other people, which made your relationship with him an easier one to build?
Yeah, I think that for a start we had a mutual friend, so I think that's the first thing that sort of vouched, I suppose, for the personality and thought that we'd get on, because I think that's the key. You know, Kenny is a good man. First and foremost, he's an unbelievable human being, as we all know. But he's got so much experience as well. So, you know, if you're someone like me at that age, at sort of 30, 31, and actually started building that relationship at probably 26, 27, and that was, you know, a coffee in Glasgow, that was around his house in Liverpool, that was at a hotel, you know. So just keep building little and often. And, you know, we've also done that before with people and not quite got on, or, you know, the values haven't been aligned. But, you know, when you've got somebody like him in your corner, as I did certainly at that stage, then I just feel it gives you that strength and confidence that you're doing the right thing to be able to be bold in your actions.
So at 31, when you take that, you get that first managerial job. You mentioned there your A license as well. Can you explain like what you actually have to do to be qualified to be a manager?
Yeah, to be qualified, you have to, depending on what level you're at, you know, for the Premier League, you have to have your pro licence or working towards your pro licence. And then I think it's the same in the Championship, and then the leagues below, you have to have your A licence. So you have to start off by taking your level 2, which you do as often as a player, and that's part of the PFA scheme. So they sort of get most players at least level 2 qualified. And then at that stage, it was the B licence, and then the A licence, and then the pro licence. So, you know, you have to get your hours in. I think there's a lot, sometimes, you know, some countries fast track it with ex-professionals and stuff like that. I'm not a believer in that. I really do think you need to do the hard yards. You know, when I was at Bristol City at 24 years old, I was taking the academy lads pretty much like every other week. And that was important because your coaching voice is different. You know, the detail actually makes you a better player, I think, to be able to really master being a coach as well. You think about the game just a little bit differently. So, you know, whether that was a women's team that I took at Yeovil a couple of times, academy at Bristol City, and when I went up to Kilmarnock, I was able to take sort of warm-ups and sort of passing drills and stuff like that. And you're building those hours, and then obviously you build your experiences. You get contacts on these courses. I actually done my pro license in Scotland, which was really, really good. Nuno and I, as an example, Nuno Espirito Santo was on that course, and Duncan Ferguson was on that course. So, you get to meet good people as well, and people that are obviously going to go on and be very successful, and you build those relationships. I suppose in a different capacity, we're all mad in the technical area. No one's sane in that technical area. But, when you're able to relax and have dinner and have drinks and talk about football, you can really build strong relationships.
What was the bigger contract, as a player or as a manager?
Yeah, I think I probably earned more as a manager than I did as a player.
What, when you go into that dressing room and you're in charge of it, was there anything you had to change, or had you already built a lot of those skills?
I think I'd built quite a lot of those skills, being captains at times of clubs or vice captains, you have sort of leadership roles. But I do remember the first, being really sprung into the job at Oldham, and all the training plans and all that type of stuff. I'd done a lot of coaching, but I'd never given a team talk. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got a team talk in 25 minutes. Oh, what am I going to say? We were playing Hartlepool, and it was a big game at the time, because Hartlepool, it was a bit of a 6-pointer down in the relegation zone, and we needed a win. And all I could think about was really a player that we had called Jose Baxter, who was a really good, talented player. The club had somehow got him from Everton. And I built the team talk around him. And I just made him, I suppose, feel $1 million. I made it everybody's goal to get him the ball. And said, look, we've got a magical number 10 at this football club, and we've got to supply him and do everything we can to get him the ball. But I remember being really, really nervous, and thinking, God, I hope these nerves don't. Was it a game plan? No. If I put that sort of speech on now at the sort of levels I've been at, I'd have probably been laughed out of the room. But for whatever reason, it worked. Jose Baxter was man of the match. I think he scored one from about 35-yard half volley in the top corner, and we won 3-0, and that was it. That was a managerial career on its start.
I don't know if you've seen. There's been a few videos circulating of Thomas Frank's team talks for Brentford, and I think what stood out in those is how he speaks to the players, how he addresses the problems that have gone on in a match, but then also credits and picks out the individuals for certain praise, and that could be the people sitting on the bench who haven't come on, and it could be Brian Mbeumo, who's obviously bagged a couple and played another fantastic game. What is your style when managing those players in that dressing room? How do you approach both the good and the bad times as a manager?
Yeah, I think it's something that is really important, that man management. I feel I'm a people person in terms of, let's say, for example, Bielsa. Bielsa wouldn't necessarily say hello in the morning, but you know what you've got to do, and you've got to execute. If you don't execute, you don't play. I like more of that sort of trust to be built up. I like to trust my players, and I like to feel trusted as well. And obviously, to do that, you need to build rapport. You want good people. I want to go sleep at night knowing that they're fighting for me as much as I'm fighting for them. So I think within that, you have tools to be able to do. I'll give you an example. So when I took Alex Pritchard, Sunderland, I used to love Pritchard, as a player. Fantastic, little magician, really. Great way to pass. And he sort of lost his way a little bit, at Huddersfield. It was a big move, but a move that didn't really work because, in the Premier League, they weren't a possession side, because you can't be when you're Huddersfield against the top team. So, he lost a bit of way, lost a bit of his confidence. And, we wanted to find that love of the game, if you like, back for Alex. And he came to Sunderland, and he was brilliant. And part of that was, I suppose, giving him that love, if you like, giving him that belief that he can be the best player in the division. And one of the things that I'd seen was the quarterback whisperer, Bruce Arians. I think he was at, I can't remember the team he was at, but Arizona Cardinals, I think it was. And I remember thinking, do you know what? every morning I'm going to get Pritchard, physical touch and a little bit of a headlock. I'm going to explain to him why we're doing the session, why he's important to the session, and how that transcends to him starting in the game on Saturday, and him influencing the game. So there's just one example of, the physical touch, the belief, the fact that he has to switch on because he knows that the sessions revolves around him, those type factors. And I think, like, if you can build rapport with players, and particularly your top players or your most creative players in that way, often that partnership's been successful. So, there's a series of, like I'd say, leadership tools, if you like, and that one would be the quarterback whisperer.
How do you deal with star culture in a dressing room where you have players who do stand out, who are maybe slightly more profiled than others in a dressing room? Now we live in a culture where the athletes are often, as big as some of the badges that they play for, and that's just going to probably continue to get bigger and bigger. How do you handle those individuals that do stand out?
Yeah.
To make sure that everyone else buys into it as well and feels important?
Honestly, I think it's something that I've got to get better at. I am very much a team player, and I want my team to, the sum of parts, if you like, to be better or greater than any individual. So, the mavericks I've had in the past, I haven't been, I would say, elite in terms of that management. You talked about Cantona and Ferguson, Adele Tarabat, is it?
Tarat,
yeah, and Warnock sort of springs to mind as well. I'd say the sort of mavericks I've had are probably Jose Baxter at Oldham, then I had Lee Tomlin at Bristol City, and probably Aidan McGeady at both Sunderland and Hibs. So, three top players at the time for the level, if you know what I mean. And it's difficult because they do think differently. Part of their quality is that sort of maverick ability to go against the norm, if you like, and to and Aidan McGeady as an example, it was a bit of a quick win for me, really, going Sunderland and bringing Aidan back, because he'd sort of been banished into the 23s by Parky at the time. And Aidan came back, and Aidan was fantastic. He scored or created almost like a goal a game. You see those stats on Messi and Ronaldo. And between him and Charlie White, he was basically 1 or 2-0 up before he'd started, data-wise. But then, it came to Hibs and Aidan wasn't playing, and, it became difficult to manage and, in my view, not conducive to the sort of the first team environment. And we didn't get on anywhere near as well as we did at Sunderland. So I think there's always a balance. I think the team has to come first. Behaviours are important. I do believe that, because, as a coach, what you choose to ignore, you encourage almost. That's how I see it anyway. But at the same time, there is the alternative argument. Everybody, I think Man United went in a suit and Cantona turned up in ripped jeans, and Alex Ferguson didn't say anything. So who am I to argue with the likes of Alex Ferguson? So I think that there is a balance. It's striking the balance, and inevitably it comes down to, are they producing on the pitch? And if they are, often they've got a better mentality, and obviously the team around and the staff around are obviously trusting them on the back of that.
Tell us a little bit about when you then moved to Bristol City, because you had quite a long time at the club. You took them well up the league, had amazing success in cup competitions as well. What was that job like? Because from my perspective, when you first got it, as you said, you were a rookie, someone's taken a punt on you. But now someone's chosen based on the work that you've done and achieved and admired. How was that for a move for you?
I loved it, if I'm honest. I started off at Oldham, and then quite quickly I was bought by Barnsley. Went for a really bad spell at Barnsley, followed by a really good spell. And Bristol City came in and bought me. I think it was 680,000 that they paid at the time, and it felt like my club. I was actually potentially, I was going abroad. Somebody had basically said, look, we want to buy you and go abroad, and I'd done the deal. And at that point, I think Steve Cottrell had got sacked from Bristol City. Then there was a period of like 6 to 8 weeks in that spell, and we won pretty much every game at Barnsley in that spell. And I remember one of the board of directors, Keith Dorr, ringing me up and You know, he basically, the club I was going to go to was owned by a sheikh, and he said to me, "Look, Sheikh Lansdowne wants to speak to you instead." And I was like, "Okay, I'd love to speak to Steve." And Steve wasn't sure originally because Bristol City were in the relegation zone, and he was like, "I want to bring in another manager. I want to bring you in as number two, and then you take over from the start of next season, hopefully in the Championship." I was like, "Nah, no chance." I was like, "Because if I come in, I'm coming in to keep you up."
And you're manager of Barnsley, right?
Yeah,
So why
and
would
I'm
you go and
manager
take
at
it?
Barnsley, and we was in the equivalent of the Papa John's final. We just beat Fleetwood to get into the final, and we were just sort of knocking on the playoff door. And we had a really good side as well. We'd built a really strong side. I said, "Look, I want to come to Bristol City because I feel like it's my club, but I want to do it under these terms, if you like." And I think Steve probably appreciated that sort of bullish nature, if you like, and at that point probably trusted that I was ready, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so the bid came in. Barnsley, I remember the CEO was really upset with me, came in and gave me a big verbal bashing in the office, which was a little bit harsh, but we're friends now, old Ben Mansford. But it felt right, it felt right for me to go back to Bristol City. It's a club that I'd always wanted to manage, really good ownership, and I believe that we could be successful there.
Because you were a player, weren't you, for Bristol City? So is that where you built the relationships?
Yeah, I think so. We got promoted as a player, got promoted from League One into the Championship, and ended up losing in the playoff final, a couple of 100 games for the club, and felt like there was unfinished business, if you know what I mean, to get to the Premier League. And like you say, they say pick your owners, don't they? And for sure, the Lansdowne family are fantastic owners, and I'd already built rapport with them over the years. But more importantly, I wanted to be the one to help them take the club to the Premier League.
That was what I was actually going to ask next. It was the importance of the relationship between you and owners, and in this context in particular, it's such an interesting model, the Bristol Sport model. What was it like for you as a manager, kind of in the earlier stages of your career, I guess, when you weren't as experienced of it, working with owners and understanding how to manage up as well as managing down?
Yeah, I think managing up is probably the biggest part of the job, if I'm honest. And it's not always just the owner. It could be board of directors, could be CEO. Obviously, a lot of directors of footballs or sporting directors now as well. I've always enjoyed my relationships with the owners. I think that I've wanted that, because in the end, you get your strength from them. Because they back you, and then it gives you that sort of, I suppose, power and strength to go and implement the plan for them. And it's difficult, leadership and fellowship. It's never going to be like 100% aligned. But what I felt was at Bristol City with the Lansdowne family is it was aligned in what we wanted to do. In the end, we was almost a victim of our own success, if I'm honest, with the amount of players that we developed and sold. And I always felt we was a team for tomorrow. Like the team really in the year I think we should have gone up. We had a few injuries, but everybody has that. But the games really just caught up with us with the cut runs that we went on. But fantastic squad, and that was the pinch point really for the club to potentially either go up or like we did have go on that run. And once that the players were exposed to those big occasions and played well in those big occasions, obviously a lot of sales off the back of that. Flint, Bobby Reid, Webster, Lloyd Kelly, Joe Bryan. A lot of these players ended up going on the back of that, and then you break up a team and you have to rebuild a new one.
And you had Tammy Abraham on loan as well, didn't you?
We did, yeah. Tammy was a great lad. Went round his house and sold the dream and to the family, and we got him down. And I remember we wanted him so much that for whatever reason we couldn't sign an actual contract on that day, so we got him to sign a bonus sheet, which meant nothing, but in his head he'd signed for Bristol City, and that was really important. So he scored, I think it was 26 goals that season for us, and it was a massive part of not only us staying up but us developing the team that then came that was successful in the 2 or 3 years after that.
Because you got to League Cup semi-final as well, didn't you, while you were there? And that was it beat Jose Mourinho's Man U and then lost, but pretty admirably, to Guardiola's City.
Yeah, it was a brilliant spell really for the club. I live in Bristol now, and I walk around Bristol, and the lads that are sort of like 20, just look at the club and that time and myself. It's just amazing because it's a bit of a one in a generation type result. But it was great, spend time with Jose, spend time with Pep. These are guys that are absolute idols to a young coach, and you get to know them a little bit. You get to understand the psyche, you get to question them, and hopefully, obviously, build rapport for the future.
Are they good with managers like you, where you're coming and you're having those conversations? Do they give you the time?
Yeah, they were brilliant. A pair of them were. I don't think you get to that level unless you're a great human being as well, because there's too many people to work with. Both great people. I mean, Jose is a good example. We beat them fair and square, and he said to me after the game, when we won the game there, the fans invaded the pitch, but the draw was being made. And there was about 100 people in a tunnel, probably about as big as this room, maybe a little bit bigger. So it was really tight and compact, and all the interviews are being done there. And he said to me, Lee, you deserve to win that game. Like, you're fantastic. Look forward to seeing you in the Prem, and I hope you get promoted, and what a great manager. And then he went straight on camera and said, Lee Johnson's the luckiest manager alive, and Bristol City should never be in the semi-final. and that was just his way. And I'd spent £500 on buying this bottle of wine, and I was so desperate to speak to Jose. I thought it's a once in a lifetime. I thought, what can I do to attract him into the office? So I sort of put it out there a little bit publicly that I'd managed to get this bottle of wine called this Barcavella, which was quite expensive. It was from his local area in Portugal, and I think it was about £500. So anyway, I ended up with this bottle of wine, and I had a sommelier there to sit, and in the end we didn't get to drink it together. I walked in the office, and my goalkeeper coach, David Coles, was sipping on this £500 bottle of wine, going, "Cool, this is lovely, gaffer." I was like, "Wait, spit that back in." So it was an amazing story. And then the Vineyard actually sent me another bottle and said, "Oh, thank you for all the advertising. Please come out and sample our vineyard and stay with us for 2 or 3 nights." So I haven't yet, but I will do at some point.
Take Jose.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be nice. Yeah, we'd really get to talk football.
You mentioned victim of success. I feel like this is something we see increasingly in management in particular at the moment. I feel you've kind of suffered from this on more than one occasion. Bristol City, Sunderland, maybe Hibs as well. You look now, you could probably say the same of situations at West Ham. You look at, wanting to change from David Moyes, you've won a European Cup, you got a trophy. It's very difficult to maintain success. But I guess the question here is, it's around the balance of managing that success and expectation that you bring to a club that when you took over wasn't necessarily performing as well, that then consistently gets to a stage where they start looking up rather than looking down. And how you balance the fan expectation and the media pressure, I guess, with what is a realistic expectation within a club.
Really difficult, because now the thirst for success is so instant. The expectation goes up year on year. Let's say a championship manager, for example, what's the best way to do it? Is it just finish outside the playoffs and then get in the playoffs and then lose in the playoffs, then go out automatic, to actually have longevity? Because if you're top and you fall out the top 2, you could go. If you're in the playoffs and fall out the playoffs, you could go. If you're mid-table and drift slightly towards relegation, you could go. So actually it's very, very difficult to actually keep, if you like, within a job if you go in at that sort of mid-level championship. So I felt always at Bristol City that we were a team for tomorrow, apart from the one season. And then when that team broke up, it was difficult. We took Josh Brownhill as an example for 150,000 from Preston and sold him for 7 million to Burnley. And I begged the club not to sell him because he was our heartbeat. So I think we was in the playoffs at that point. And listen, it was important for cash flow, and you have to understand that. I think it was 7 million on the nose that we sold him to Burnley for. And it was a great move for Josh, and Josh was a great lad, but he and we had developed Josh, that he was the heartbeat of our team. So not only did he have a value externally, but he had a huge value for us on the pitch. And if you take players like him, like Webster, like Lloyd Kelly, that you develop out consistently, it becomes very difficult. You just like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back at times. And that is because the game style, I think, shows off the players. Webster, we had driving out from the middle, and he was having shots as a centre half, and Callas and Webster, a fantastic partnership. So, the team is about the partnerships, it's about the individuals, but it's also about the team building process. And obviously that does take time. And, there's 1,000 examples of managers and coaches that have developed players, sold those players, and then found it very difficult to replace. And you're right, the expectation somehow goes up. I remember that we sold Lloyd Kelly for, I think, 17.5 million to Bournemouth. We then sold Webster 17.5, rising to 22.5, I think it was, and then Webster for 20, rising to 25. And then we brought in Ash Williams, and Ash Williams was a very good player, but obviously he was at the tail end of his career, which meant we had to adapt our playing style a little bit based on his sort of lack of pace, if you know what I mean, even though he was a very good footballer. So, your team has to constantly adapt styles to be able to adjust. But somehow the expectation goes up. And I think the anxiety comes for a manager where the expectation is high, the reality is a bit lower, and then there's a grey area in there. And I remember talking to Jose, actually, about that. I said to him, I know why you're frustrated. And he said, go on then, tell me why. I said, because you finished second last year for Man United, and you got every drop out of that team. And he said, thank you. He's like, because you're right. That's why I'm so frustrated, because I know that I've got everything out of that team to get it to finish second and win the cup. I think they did. And I'm getting no credit for it.
He always says it's his greatest achievement. Everyone thinks it's tongue in cheek.
Yeah,
but
but he's right, because he knows. And that's my point. As a manager, you know the level of your team, but also you know the expectation. And sometimes you can bridge the gap by good coaching, by confidence, by great run, by not getting any injuries to key players, but over a course of 10, 12, 15 seasons, that'll always average itself out, if you know what I mean, based on the size of the club.
Is there an impossible part of being a manager then, which is like, you're the first to get the criticism, you're often the brunt of fan anger if things aren't going right. Yeah, as you've just highlighted, there are things completely out of your control that can completely change how you do your job. That's nothing to do with your capabilities. It's the assets that you have to work with. So when things do start going wrong, is there a conversation with an owner where you go, look, in January, you've sold the main asset here. Until we get a proper chance to address this in the summer, we're going to have maybe challenges. You're not going to say we're going to be crap, but there's a reality to this now because of the decision we made. We can't just expect it to be like it was. Or does that just not happen?
It does happen, yeah. Again, Steve, like I say, was a fantastic owner in that sense. Yeah, he had been there, seen it and done it before. So he could ride the waves of emotion a little bit better than maybe some other owners that I've experienced. So, I would always be honest with Steve, and sometimes he didn't like it. Sometimes he thought it was negative or defeatist, if you know what I mean. But I saw it as my job to give him the truth as how I saw it and what's required to go to the next level. And we either could do it or we couldn't do it, obviously based on those factors, whether it be financial or whether it be potentially the succession plan of a young player coming through. So I think it's interesting because more and more people are going away from decision making based on sporting success. There's too many business decisions, I think, being made. I saw Eddie Howe talking about it, for example, a couple of days ago about the sort of FFP, and I think Man United re-signed Pogba for reasons that were based on like the amount of followers he had and stuff like that at that period of time. And I'm thinking to myself, I think there's opportunity there to make more decisions based on sporting success rather than the business side, if you know what I mean. And whether that's lower down or higher up, it will remain to be seen. But There's a lot of people involved now in recruitment. It's not just how it used to be, sort of a manager, and rightly so. There's a lot of data involved, and I'm a big believer in data. I like to work with data, but as a flag, and there's still contextual decisions to be made. But if you get your recruitment right, generally you're going to do well.
So can you take us through a transfer process? You mentioned there a lot of people involved in it. What actually goes on? You're trying to sign a player for Sunderland. What are you doing?
I think the first thing is you have a squad, makeup, if you like. You'd have ideally 24 players. I like to work roughly in a system called 4-8-8-4, which is 4 16 to 20-year-olds, 4 20 to 25-year-olds, 8 20 to 25-year-olds, 8 prime players, 25 to 30, and then 4 twilights, sort of over 35. And that balance is important, but obviously it changes with every club and every club's ambitions and goals, whether they're a selling club, whether they're just for sporting success, what type of players you can and can't sign, who's coming through. So the first thing is to get your squad sort of planning sorted out. And then you'd have a set of metrics really for the DNA of each position. So, let's say a winger, for example, you would have the desired metrics that match how you want to play. And that's where that'll all be pulled into a data set and a data system. And then, players will be punched out of that. Not always fully reliable. Because, as an example, when I played, Leon Britton at Sheffield United was a completely different player to Leon Britton at Swansea. So, the data wouldn't have showed how good Leon Britton was unless he was playing for Swansea, because Sheffield United were playing long ball and he was hardly getting a touch. I remember playing against Leon Britton 3 weeks apart and looking at the Prozone stats. He had 20 touches playing for Sheffield United and so like 120 and totally bossed the game playing for Swansea. So, it has to be contextualised somehow. So, you're always looking for the value, obviously, within that. Bristol City, a good example, was Nicholas Eliasson that we signed purely on data. We done that by looking at the top winger at the time as we thought it was, which was Knockaert. We then tried to match as close as we could the radar, if you like, and we had a list of 10 players. Eliasson was the one that we could afford. We went to look at him, we met him, we'd done the deep dive. Funnily enough, he was the second choice, and the first choice was Ollie Watkins. And like I say,
when would that be? When he was
at Exeter,
really?
Yeah. But for whatever reason, we didn't want to pay that money at that point. So it then goes through.
So budgets, I guess, are first and foremost, right?
Yeah, budgets.
You get
important.
a budget. Are you setting as a manager? Are you having that discussion with the CEO?
Well, this is
now the director of football, or
you
who's
don't
it with?
always get the budget. Let me tell you. Sometimes you get a budget, and sometimes it's reliant on an owner wanting to do it or not. I think it's better when you've got the number and you've got the budget, and you can work towards something then. But like I say, all that information will get pulled into a shortlist really, and then the shortlist, hopefully myself, my coaching staff will have an eye on it. And it depends where you work. Some clubs don't want the manager or the head coach involved at all in recruitment. They just want them to coach. Some want some element of influence, and some want final sign off.
But that, I'm guessing, at the start when you have the conversation with the owner, or
you
not.
do, but it doesn't always pan out. Hibs was a good example. Like, I went there for football autonomy, and very, very quickly I knew I didn't have football autonomy. And that's okay. I still had a choice: do I stay or do I go? But the reason I signed for Hibs was specifically that I felt I didn't have football autonomy at Sunderland, and I wanted the football autonomy, which is why I went to Hibs. And then very quickly, I proved to them that I didn't have football autonomy.
So you as a manager, do you want? You're someone that likes I don't want to say control. You're someone that likes the influence over that part of it, because you need to find the players to shape around your playing style.
I think it's about adding value. I think you're right. The initial conversation and what you go in on is important. I love the grass. I love coaching. That is my. I'm a coach. I'm a developer. I love the team building process. But if you've got experience in recruitment, as an example, or you might have seen players, worked players, heard about players maybe in this spell that I've been out watching a lot of games on the road, it would be natural for the recruitment department and the technical director or the sporting director or director of football to at least heed sort of the advice of the head coach. Now, that is changing without a question of a doubt. When I was manager of Oldham 12 years ago, when it was all in the manager pretty much, to now where, the level of influence can be maybe 10, 15, 20% at max within those players. But in the end, obviously the head coach or the manager is picking the team. So my view is that, if you can get that alignment from top to bottom based on the recruitment, you've got a really good chance. And it can be done. And now in reality, there's not really one person that decides, because it's gone through a process of, recruitment department, data, ownership, budget, director of football, manager, coaching staff, physios, media department are all involved now across pretty much every transfer.
What's the hardest job you've had?
I think Hibs was probably the hardest job. I think Hibs probably, I felt like it was high expectation, which was good. Big club, really big club, great club. Hibs, loved it, loved Edinburgh. But the quality of player and professional and the sheer numbers that we had, I think when I first went in, made it very difficult. I thought they'd made some poor signings really over the period of the 2 or 3 years before there. And, I felt it was a difficult job to take that club from, I think it was 8th or 9th to sort of 5th in one season. And it took a lot of work, fantastic staff, again, good ownership. But Ron Gordon, God bless his soul, died halfway through my tenure there. And that was difficult as well, because, he was a fantastic character, great human being, and led, if you like, by example and charisma.
You've got, I guess, with Hibs and also your time at Sunderland, you've got clubs that have enormous fan bases, history. How difficult is it when you're the manager of those teams to try and really focus on what's happening on the pitch? And I guess not make decisions guided by fan sentiment and what happens around you.
Do you know what? I've loved it. I've loved, the Sunderland as an example, huge club, really sort of crazy passionate fan base, and I absolutely loved my time at Sunderland. I was gutted when that ended. I felt we was doing well. I think 3rd in the league when I got sacked. We'd won the first cup for 50 years at Wembley. I had the best win ratio since 1897. We'd built an amazing squad and team, and we was window to window. We were getting better, but obviously big clubs, big demand, big pressure. And I think that's the privilege. That's how it feels. I never once felt like I couldn't cope, didn't want to handle it. I loved every minute of it. But I think the media scrutiny is the bit that probably is the most difficult to manage. Probably one of my weaknesses is my reaction to injustice. And, there's a lot of injustice in football management. So you've got to be able to skip over that with energy and with a spring in your step at a big club like that. But I still see Sunderland fans now. They're all over the world at all places. And I've just felt like I had such a good rapport with the fan base.
You're at a club doing well. You think you're doing well. What's it like when... How do you, I guess, get fired? Is it a conversation?
It can turn very, very quickly. Sunderland, as an example, there was probably 3 or 4 factors that sort of led up to that at that point in time, and it accumulated with a bit of a freak result and a freak loss to Bolton away, and it was I suppose a bit of a crescendo. But you can always, you can feel, you can sense, there's something going on in the background, or there's a disagreement, or you're not quite as aligned, or the communication stops, or you hear a few things in football. And I felt, I knew that one was coming, Sunderland. It was probably coming a couple of months, if you like, before that, but we went on a fantastic run, and I think I might have even been current reigning manager of the month, and I got sacked from Sunderland. But such is life. It does hurt, make no, this is not when you put everything into it and all hours of every day, and managers will tell you that they're literally working from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 at night. It doesn't always mean they're in the club, but they're at home, they're watching games, they're watching opponents, they're planning the session for the next day, they're planning board meetings and the communication, the press communication, all that stuff. There's so many facets to management, and it is all consuming, and it's constant. And you've got to be world class in so many areas. And if you do fall short in one of the particular areas, it will catch you out very, very quickly.
Do you think we're too quick these days to fire? This hire and fire culture.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it? You wouldn't you wouldn't have a CEO of a FTSE company getting an average tenure of 9 months, would you? It doesn't work. But it's very easy to point the finger. Because of all those processes, because of all those, somebody's not producing a player, as an example, it's very easy to point the finger at the manager to say, or the head coach to say he's not doing the right thing. But that's not going to change. That's not me being bitter. That's not me being upset. It's just the way it is. It's a very political world, football, and you have to navigate that with being genuine, being honest, and being humble, and obviously you have to get results.
Is the obligation always on the club to honour your contract financially? Do they have to make sure that you're supported if you are fired ahead of your contract expiring?
Depends what's in your contract. It could be anything. It could be nothing to 3 months, 6 months, a year. It's not just a manager that gets sacked. Often it's his coaching staff as well, and that can be really difficult. They're not on probably the money that the head coach or manager's on, 3 or 4 kids in the background, and they got 3 months payoff, so they've quickly got to turn it around and not get too upset and try and find another job within that period. So you're not just fighting for yourself as a manager, you're fighting for a set of staff, players, fan base, and a lot of families.
So, you're looking at it now, you've had your time off. Your last job was Fleetwood, so you've had Hibs and Fleetwood. Those two, as you said, didn't go to plan. You then had this break. How do you look at your career now? What's the focus? What do you want next?
I want to get back in, straight back in the mix. I think Hibs. I feel like Hibs was sort of successful, really. Fleetwood, I was there just over 100 days. There was no transfer window. It just wasn't the right fit, and I think the key is to find the right fit. I've still got a lot of belief in myself, in the way I work. I love developing teams. I love developing players. I've definitely had the opportunity to do different things in football in this period of time. Go to a more strategic level, but it's not something that I'm as passionate about at the moment as I am coaching and being in the technical area, being in the dugout. So for me, it's about finding the right fit, working with as good a people as I can with a project that I'm really excited and enthusiastic about. And I feel like in this period I've become a better person, better manager for my experiences. Having time to reflect, having time to redesign. And then I suppose freshness as well, to be able to go into the next role sort of full of energy. Bill Bezick's a fantastic sports psychologist, and he always used to say to me, Lee, remember the health of the team is in the face of the coach. And you see that a lot in the post-match interviews, managers that are drained mentally, physically, they're tired, and then you see the fresh one. So, the ability to go in fresh, to be able to add those new dynamics, I suppose, to the playing philosophy, but also the way I work and the methodology, the way you coach it.
Let's say you get offered a job in the Championship, let's say you get offered a job in League One. What are the differences between taking over a club in those two leagues?
Quality of player, first and foremost. I think you have to...
Sorry for that, it's obvious.
It is obvious. However, simplicity is genius, I suppose. So to simplify the complexity of the way you want to play is one of the challenges. I suppose in my mind, the way I want to play probably suits elite international players. So
Premier League Jolter, please.
Well, but that'd be nice. But when I was probably playing our best football at Bristol City, it was full of international players. You know, it was internationals everywhere. Lloyd Kelly under 21. You know, you had players like Famara Jeju, you had Jamie Patson got in the Scotland squad, you know, Callas, Czech, you know, so there was top quality players, Jada Silva coming through the ranks with England. So, you know, they can take on that information quickly, they can implement it quickly. So obviously the lower you drop down, then you can still do it, but it takes a little bit more time, and therefore you have to simplify the complexity to be a little bit more, not pragmatic per se, but simple in the way that you play.
If you got promoted, I mean, let's say you get promoted with Bristol City at the time, you go up into the Premier League. We've had a couple of managers in the last couple of seasons. It's worked out well for Vincent Kompany, but a Russell Martin and Vincent Kompany who go up playing a certain way, they do not adapt a playing style to Premier League when clearly they're at a significant disadvantage against a lot of the teams that they're playing against, and it doesn't necessarily work out for them. What's the balance as a manager for you of kind of sticking to your guns and trying to play the same way that's got you there to actually adapting to the broader requirements of a league?
It doesn't make sense to me, managers that go up and don't adapt, because you win the championship by, you know, having 65% possession, but no team goes into the Premier League and has 65% possession. So you have to adapt. You can still keep your principles of play, and I think they should remain. But you have to be better and solid. And, you know, Fulham is a good example. You remember they went up, and 6-7 years ago, I think, I remember, because Joe Bryan was there, and they tried to double down on the philosophy, if you like, of possession. Spent 150 odd million, I think, in doing it, and ended up with 29% possession and went straight down. So, you know, you have to find the balance, because in the end, as a manager, you know, results are the most important thing, and also the players, because when you've played a possession game against a top quality team that are better than you, the fear creeps in. You know, I've been there. Like, we've played teams where I've been better than, and we've been able to dominate in possession, and they've played expansively, and you capitalise because you're mentally a little bit quicker than them, a little bit sharper than them, physically a little bit sharper. Your team as a whole is, Joe. So what happens is that the fear creeps in for the side that's too expansive, and they can't cope. And that's when you see the likes of teams go up in the Premier League, just keep getting the ball taken off them from playing out of the back, and then 3-0 down before they've even started. So there is striking, in my view, striking the balance, but I suppose people like Vincent Kompany have proved otherwise to go and get a top world job on the back of playing the way he did.
There's what I think is quite a scary possibility this year, where for the second year you've got the three teams that go up will go straight back down. Yeah, we've probably got one of the best championships we've ever had. The quality of that league, if you compare it to other European leagues, is right up there. Do you think that's a concern? Do you think there's something that needs to be built into the broader football pyramid to ensure that everything's kind of kept slightly more closely together on a competitive side?
Yeah, I think the only thing you could change there really is the parachute payments, isn't it? In terms of those clubs that go down do tend to have the best opportunity to bounce. I think West Brom didn't finish outside the bottom six or the top six of the champ for like 10 years running a few years ago. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily leave itself open to that sort of competitive challenge and competitive league, and that's why a lot of clubs get into trouble in the Championship, because they're all chasing that dream. So, you know, I understand why they do it, because, you know, there's a big outlay. The Premier League want to keep that quality and that standard high. If the likes of a Luton do break in for a fantastic season, then all credit to them, but that in the end will end up being the anomaly. So I think it's just as much parity and as much you know, competitive stability really within all the levels. You know, you don't want to see clubs going out of business. Yeah. And the beauty of our pyramid system is you've always got a chance, and we have to keep it that way, because if we lose that, then we'll lose just such a fundamental joy, I suppose, of our game.
Quick fire round.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Give you a few short statements. Don't worry, they're very. Start with a nice one. What's the best atmosphere that you've either played or managed in a stadium?
I remember Bristol City, we played against Middlesbrough at home. We was in League One there in the Premier League. We were 2-0 down, we got it back to 2-2. That day at Ashton Gate, that night, was unbelievable. Scotty Murray ended up, club legend and a very good friend of mine, ended up scoring the equaliser as only he could. And literally the roof came off that day. So that was probably the best. Even though I played 92,000 at Wembley and stuff like that, I just, that was amazing. And also Sunderland, just the home games, 34,000 on a Tuesday night. You beat Sheffield Wednesday 5-0. Just proper supporters, big atmospheres.
What do you know now that you wish you'd known at the start of your management career?
I think that you have to build up your resilience. I think, if I had my time again, I would have, I suppose, just worked on the resilient factor and what was required, because you end up negatively affecting, I think, sometimes the people around you based on the sort of the pressure you're under, I suppose. So it's about being able to, it's the coping strategy to be able to not only enjoy the work, but, not let the external factors affect you, as you mentioned earlier.
What was the hardest thing about playing for your dad?
Fans. Yeah, never the players. The players, I never had one problem with the players. But it was tough. It was tough and good in one sense. It was tough because, naturally the nepotism shouts there. I would have said the same thing. So we had to be successful, and that put a lot of pressure on it. And he was hard on me, by the way, because he had to say what everybody else was thinking. And at times that was a bit harsh. However, I felt that it really worked as well. And, the fact that we trusted each other, there wasn't a personality clash. It worked for the teams I was in because I could articulate a point to the management from the squad. And that helped us be successful, if that makes sense. A captain would sometimes do that, but I could do it probably a little bit more because of, obviously, the fact that I was the manager's son.
Who's the most talented player you've worked with? Talented.
Probably Aidan McGeady in terms of sheer skill. His nutmeg success was 98%, stuff like that.
They must have hated him in training.
Yeah, and you'd forever see players laughing or rolling their eyes just as he's about to nutmeg them, knowing that they're trying to stop it, but it's still happening. Again, fantastic player to watch, and whether it be in training or games, but difficult player to manage.
Piece of advice that you give to a manager looking to take their first job?
I would say get a strong support network around you, sort of a mentoring type system. I called it the corner earlier. So make sure your corner's strong. It's very, very difficult for young men. You've only got to look at the stats. I think when I started, you got 90 games. Now, first-time manager gets 35 games on average. So, you've got...
Not even a season.
Not even a season. So, it's really difficult for all managers, but particularly the young managers coming through. And I think be ready. Don't jump the gun. And sometimes be brave enough to turn down an opportunity, and like I say, be ready on all the facets of management, and then you'll step into it a lot more comfortable.
Change one rule in football. What do you change?
That stupid rule where they don't give offside, but they know it's offside. So the ball goes over the top. Everybody knows it's offside. I just think it's dangerous. The keeper's coming out to clatter a centre forward. And then only when he touches it does the linesman give offside. So that's probably the rule. Maybe
there's a balance, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a balance. Yeah.
Finally, can you sum up your coaching style in 3 words? High
pressure, breaking lines, and data-led.
Yeah, 3 phrases is fine.
Yeah, data-led goals. So effectively, it's upgrading crosses and shots.
So any owners looking for new managers, you've heard it here. Lee, I really appreciate you coming in and chatting. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been great to chat.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And like I say, hopefully I'll be back one day, and congratulations on your great work.
Thank you.